A poor black mother with a gravely ill daughter tirelessly navigates her daily life, burdened with the worries of making ends meet and providing for her family. However, amidst the rush and chaos, she witnesses a life-changing moment, a child on the brink of being kidnapped. Guided by a mother's instinctive love and seeing her own child reflected in the boy, she acts without hesitation. Ignoring the danger, she boldly confronts the two ruthless criminals. This brave act not only saves the boy's life, but also transforms her own future in unimaginable ways, even for herself. Before we dive into this deeply moving story, where are you watching this video from? If tales of courage and hope resonate with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more inspiring stories to come. Now, let's get started. James Carter walked briskly along the cracked sidewalk, her steel-toed boots scraping against the pavement with dry, hollow sounds. A weathered silver-gray backpack dangled off one shoulder, lightly thumping against her back with each hurried step. Early Monday morning, the streets were eerily quiet, with only the occasional sound of distant traffic breaking the silence. She glanced at her watch, her brow furrowing. 7:58 a.m. Her morning shift at Harbor Logistics Warehouse started at 8:15, and John Smith, her boss, was unforgiving about tardiness. James had already been warned twice this week alone. Another infraction wouldn't just mean a reprimand, it would mean a pay cut. With medical bills for Sarah piling up, she couldn't afford another blow. Her pace quickened as she rounded the corner, but then a faint sound made her stop. At first it was indistinct, like the wind rustling through garbage. But then it came again, this time clearer, more anguished. "Let me go, please, let me go." James froze, her ears straining, her blood turning cold. The voice of a boy, high-pitched and desperate, echoed from the alley ahead. Her heart began to pound wildly in her chest. "No, don't stop. Just keep going. This isn't your problem," she told herself, though her feet hesitated. But then the voice rang out again, sharper this time, wrenching her heart. "Help! Somebody, please help me!" James clenched her jaw, silently cursing herself as her feet came to a stop. Her conscience screamed, drowning out every reason to move on. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she turned around and headed toward the alley. And the sight before her made her blood run cold. Two large men in dark clothing were dragging a boy toward a black van parked at the far end of the alley. The boy, no older than 7 or 8, with disheveled blonde hair and a tear-streaked face, was flailing helplessly in their iron grip. "Let me go!" the boy cried, his small legs kicking frantically in desperation. James tightened her grip on the backpack strap, her hands trembling, but her eyes burning with determination. "I can't let this happen." She took a deep breath and stepped into the shadowy alley where fate awaited her. James glanced quickly down the deserted street. No cars, no people, no one to help. She gritted her teeth, silently cursing, her eyes darting frantically for anything she could use. Her gaze landed on an old wooden plank leaning against a trash bin nearby. Without hesitation, she grabbed it, gripping it tightly, and took a deep breath before shouting into the alley. "Hey, I've called the cops! They're on their way!" The two men froze, their heads snapping toward her. The taller one, with a scar across his cheek, narrowed his eyes menacingly. "What did you say?" he growled. James tightened her hold on the plank to steady herself. "I said the cops are coming. They'll be here in minutes. If you don't want to get caught, you'd better get out of here now." The shorter man, stockier with a shaved head, sneered. "You think you can scare us? There's no one here, and we don't see any cop cars." James stood her ground. "Then stay and find out. The police already know your van's license plate." She deliberately glanced toward the main street as if waiting for sirens. The two men exchanged uneasy glances, doubt flickering on the scarred man's face. "Damn it! Let's go!" the taller man barked. The shorter one released the boy, shoving him aside roughly before the two men turned and bolted toward the end of the alley. The black van's engine roared to life, its tires screeching loudly against the pavement as it sped away. James stood there, panting, the plank still clenched in her hands. She watched until she was sure they were gone. Then she rushed toward the boy. He was huddled against the wall, trembling and clutching his knees to his chest. James dropped the plank and knelt down, her voice soft and calm. "Hey, kid, it's okay now. They're gone." The boy looked up, his wide, tear-filled eyes meeting hers. His lips quivered, but he didn't speak. James knelt a little closer, keeping her distance gentle. "My name's James. What's your name?" "Timmy," the boy stammered, his voice so faint she could barely hear him. "Timmy," James repeated, trying to smile. "That's a great name. Listen, Timmy, you're safe now, okay? I won't let anyone hurt you again." Timmy sniffled, nodding slightly, but his small hands still trembled. James glanced quickly toward the street again. "I need to get you somewhere safe," she said, turning back to him. "Do you know where your home is? Do you have an address?" Timmy shook his head, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't know. I just want to go home." James felt her heart tighten. She clenched her fists to steady herself. "It's okay, Timmy. I'll help you find your way home." All right, she said quickly, softening her tone. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out. The police can help." Mentioning the police seemed to calm Timmy. His sobs gradually quieted until only soft sniffles remained. James straightened up and held out her hand. "Come on, let's go. I'll take you to them." Timmy hesitated for a moment, his eyes still red and puffy, but finally he reached out and took her hand. His small hand was icy cold. "That's it," James said gently, gripping his hand firmly. She led Timmy out of the alley, her eyes darting around, alert for any signs of danger. They walked through the streets, their pace quickening as they headed toward the nearest police station. Timmy stayed close to James, his small legs struggling to keep up with her determined stride. James glanced at her watch again. She was late. Far too late. Her boss would undoubtedly be furious. There would likely be a deduction from her paycheck, and she couldn't afford to lose that money. But as she looked down at Timmy, his tiny hands still gripping hers tightly, seeking safety, she knew she had done the right thing. When they entered the police station, the cool blast of air conditioning hit them. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting a pale glow over the room. A few officers sat at their desks, busy with paperwork, while others murmured quietly into radios. James squeezed Timmy's hand once more, nodding to reassure him before calling out loudly, "Hey! I need some help here." Her voice cut through the background noise of the station. A middle-aged man with graying hair, dressed in a police uniform, looked up from behind his desk and walked over. "What's going on?" the officer asked, his gaze quickly landing on Timmy, who clung tightly to James, his red, tear-streaked eyes filled with fear. "This boy, Timmy," James began, trying to steady her voice despite the urgency in her tone. "I found him in an alley. Two men, they were trying to drag him into a van. I scared them off, but Timmy is still really shaken. He doesn't know where his home is, and I didn't know what else to do, so I brought him here." The officer listened intently, his expression growing more serious as James recounted the story. "You did the right thing bringing him here," he said, nodding at her. "We'll take care of the boy and work on contacting his family. Thank you for your courage and quick thinking." James exhaled deeply, relief washing over her. But when her eyes met Timmy's worried gaze, she realized her role in this wasn't entirely over. The officer's expression immediately turned serious. He asked, "You said there were two men trying to force this boy into a van?" James nodded. "Yes, I can describe them. Both were large. One was taller, with a long scar across his cheek. The other was shorter, stockier, and had a shaved head. They were driving a black van without license plates, or at least I didn't see any." The officer pulled a notebook from his pocket and quickly jotted down her words. "All right, I'll have someone formally document this incident." He stepped away and gestured for another officer to approach. A younger female officer, likely in her early 30s, hurried over to James and Timmy. She introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Officer Green." Her tone was professional, but softened with warmth as she crouched down to Timmy's level. "You're safe now. No one can hurt you anymore, okay?" Timmy nodded slightly, his red, tearful eyes still filled with fear. His small hand remained tightly clasped around James's, as if afraid to let go. Green offered Timmy a kind smile before standing and turning to James. "Can you walk me through everything that happened? Please describe it in as much detail as you can." James nodded and recounted the entire incident, from hearing Timmy's cries in the alley to seeing the two men trying to drag him into the van, and how they fled when she intervened. "They didn't say much," James added. occasionally glancing at Timmy as if to ensure he wasn't further distressed. But it seemed planned. The van's door was already open and they were moving quickly. Green recorded every word, nodding attentively. "Thank you. This information is vital. We've received a few reports of similar incidents recently, but this is the first time someone intervened in time. You may have saved this boy's life." James shifted uncomfortably at the praise. "I just did what I had to do," she replied, her gaze briefly landing on Timmy. The boy remained silent, but his small hand gripping hers had grown warmer. Green smiled encouragingly. "Sometimes it's the simple things like this that make the biggest difference." "I just couldn't leave the boy there," James muttered, her gaze wavering slightly as she glanced down at Timmy. Taylor Green responded gently, her voice soft and sincere. "Not everyone would have done what you did. It takes a lot of courage to act like that. You did a good thing." Timmy whimpered faintly, his voice barely audible. "I just want to go home." Taylor Green crouched down to meet his eyes, her expression tender. "We'll make sure you're okay. We'll call your mom and dad, and they'll come get you." James looked down at Timmy, attempting a reassuring smile. "Look, kid, you're in good hands now." Finally, Timmy released his grip on James, allowing Taylor Green to gently lead him to a chair near the desk. He sat down, curling his knees up to his chest, his gaze still restless but noticeably calmer. Taylor Green knelt beside Timmy, speaking to him in a soft, soothing tone, as though trying to mend the fresh wounds of his fear. James stood there, exhaling a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The tension in her chest eased, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. Timmy was safe. Another officer approached James, a tall, broad-shouldered man holding a clipboard. "I'll need your contact information in case we have more questions," he said. "Of course," James replied immediately, quickly providing her name, phone number, and address. The officer nodded, thanking her before adding, "Don't worry, we'll handle things from here." James nodded back, though her thoughts had already drifted elsewhere. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:35 a.m. Her stomach sank. "Damn it," James muttered, raising a hand to rub her face. She was officially late for work. Taylor Green, having just finished with Timmy, walked back over to her. "Are you all right?" she asked, her expression full of concern. James smirked faintly, half-heartedly. "I'm fine. It's just, I'm late for work." Taylor's brows furrowed slightly. "You're late because you brought the boy here?" "Yeah, but it's fine," James replied quickly, waving a hand as if to dismiss the concern. "I didn't really have much of a choice." Taylor Green studied her, her gaze firm yet warm. "Given what happened, I'd say you made the right call. I'm sure the boy's parents would think so too." James chuckled softly, a small but relieved laugh. "Guess I'll find out when I see my paycheck." Taylor Green smiled back, though her eyes held a glimmer of empathy. She understood that James had faced a difficult morning, but her actions had saved a life, something not everyone would have the courage to do. "Are you sure you don't need anything? Coffee? Water?" Taylor Green asked, her expression filled with concern. "I'm fine," James replied, her eyes darting to Timmy. The boy seemed calmer now, Taylor's warm and kind presence clearly soothing him. "All right," Taylor said, turning to Timmy. "Let's call your parents, okay? I bet they're worried sick." As Taylor picked up the phone, James felt her part in this was coming to an end. Everything was now in the hands of the police, and they would take care of the rest. She glanced at Timmy one last time, giving him a small nod. The boy looked at her, blinking shyly, before lifting a small hand to wave. James offered a faint smile, waving back, and turned to leave. The chilly morning air greeted her as she stepped out of the police station. She inhaled deeply, trying to shake off the tension that had gripped her earlier. Entering the warehouse, James pushed open the heavy door. Her boots thudded against the concrete floor, echoing in the vast space. The air was thick with the smell of oil and cardboard. The rumble of forklifts reverberated from the high metal ceiling. A quick glance at the clock above the break room made her stomach drop. 9:35 a.m. She was exactly 1 hour late. "Damn it," James muttered under her breath, running a hand over her face. Her shift, technically, had started just after 8, and John Smith, the warehouse manager, wasn't exactly known for his forgiving nature. James pushed open the warehouse door and headed straight for the time clock. She swiped her card, the machine emitting a faint beep before turning to walk toward the loading dock. She hadn't even made it halfway when a sharp voice called out behind her, "James!" She froze, the familiar sense of dread creeping in. Turning around, she saw John Smith, her boss, striding toward her. He held a clipboard in one hand, his perpetually disapproving brow furrowed even deeper. "You're an hour late," Smith barked, stopping directly in front of her. He gestured toward the time clock with his clipboard as if it were a sacred artifact. "Do you know what time our shifts start?" "Yes, sir," James replied, keeping her tone as neutral as possible. 8 o'clock, not 9, not 8:15. 8 o'clock sharp. I understand that. You understand. I understand. But rules are rules, no exceptions." Smith cut her off, his tone icy. "If you decide to come in late, your pay gets docked. You know the policy, James." James tightened her grip on her backpack strap, her jaw clenching, but she maintained her composure. "I understand. But if you'll allow me to explain." Smith raised an eyebrow, the sarcasm dripping from his expression. "Oh, I can't wait to hear this one." James took a deep breath, suppressing the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "I was late because I had to take a child to the police station," she began, her voice calm and steady. "I saw a boy being grabbed by two men. It looked like they were trying to kidnap him. I couldn't just walk away. I had to stop them and make sure he was safe." Smith stared at her, saying nothing. His expression was unreadable. Then he laughed, a short, cold laugh, devoid of any humor. "So now you're a superhero, running around saving children instead of showing up to work on time?" James stiffened, her hands gripping tighter. She stared back at him, unwavering, though the unfairness of his words smoldered within her, like a slow-burning fire waiting to ignite. "I didn't do it to cause trouble, Mr. Rollins," James said, her voice steady despite the tension in her tone. "The boy needed help, and there was no one else around." "Uh-huh," Rollins replied, waving dismissively. "And it didn't occur to you to call someone else like, oh, I don't know, the police? Instead of playing hero and making yourself late?" James clenched her fists at her sides, striving to maintain composure. "There wasn't time to call anyone. I had to act quickly. Look, I know I'm late and I know the rules, but what was I supposed to do? Leave the boy there?" Roland snorted, his tone dripping with mockery. "What you were supposed to do was show up on time, like everyone else here. You think those pallets are going to load themselves?" He gestured toward the stack of boxes waiting at the loading dock, his expression icy. James inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm just asking for a little understanding here. It's not like I was sitting at home watching TV." Rollins raised an eyebrow, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You want understanding? Let me give you some perspective. I've got a warehouse full of people who managed to get here on time this morning without needing to play superhero. And you think I'm going to give you a pass because of some story about a kid?" James felt a sharp retort forming on her tongue, but bit it back. Instead, she exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right, I get it." Rollins gave a curt nod. "Good. Now get to work. You're already an hour behind, and we need those shipments out before noon." Without another word, Rollins turned and walked away, leaving James standing there, her shoulders stiff with frustration. "Petty bastard," James muttered under her breath, shaking her head as she made her way toward the stack of pallets Rollins had pointed out. The loading dock buzzed with activity now, forklifts darting back and forth and workers shouting instructions to one another. James pulled her gloves from her back pocket and slipped them on, focusing on the task at hand. As she began lifting boxes onto the conveyor belt, her mind drifted back to Timmy, the boy's tear-streaked face, his trembling hands clutching hers. The memory was still fresh, vivid in her thoughts. She could almost hear his shaky, desperate voice again. "I just want to go home." The image of his fearful eyes clashed with the simmering frustration she felt over Rollins's mocking words and blatant disregard. But deep down, James knew she had made the right choice. Standing upright, she wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "There's no point dwelling on it," she told herself. "Rollins won't change his mind, and that pay deduction isn't coming back. But Timmy is safe. That's worth more than a few dollars." The morning dragged on. James worked in silence, lifting, stacking, and sorting the goods. Her body moved automatically, a rhythm ingrained from years of repetitive labor. Yet, in her heart, the memory of Timmy and the choice she had made earlier that morning echoed loudly. It had been the right thing to do, and she knew she would do it all over again if she had to. The atmosphere in the police station settled into an uncanny stillness as Officer Taylor Green picked up the phone, preparing to call Timmy's parents. James had already left to return to work, but the boy's tear-streaked face and faint, trembling whispers lingered in the air like haunting echoes. Taylor Green glanced at Timmy. He sat curled up on the chair, knees pulled tightly to his chest, his red, tired eyes fixed on the floor. Taking a deep breath, she dialed the number from the file. The phone rang only twice before a tense, broken voice answered. "This is Ethan Parker." "Hello, Mr. Parker. This is Officer Taylor Green from the police department," she said, her tone professional but gentle. "We found your son, Timmy." The other end of the line fell silent for a moment, as if her words needed time to sink in. Then a flurry of choked, stammering words burst through. You said you found my son? Is he safe? Where is he?" "Yes, sir. Timmy is safe, and he's here with us at the station. I'd like you to come as soon as you can." "We're on our way," Ethan replied, his voice cracking with emotion. Thank you so much." At the Parker home, the next 10 minutes passed in a blur. Ethan hung up and rushed into the living room, where Laura, his wife, sat on the sofa clutching Timmy's favorite stuffed dinosaur. "They've found Timmy," he exclaimed, his voice breaking. Laura shot to her feet, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and relief. "They found him?" Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "He's safe. We have to go now." Without another word, they bolted out the door, climbed into their sleek black SUV, and sped toward the police station. Laura gripped the dashboard, one hand covering her mouth as she whispered prayers over and over. "Please let him be okay. Please let him be okay." "He's okay," Ethan reassured her, his voice trembling. "They said he's safe." When they arrived at the police station, Laura didn't wait for Ethan to fully stop the car. She flung the door open and sprinted up the steps and through the door. Her eyes frantically scanned the room, searching for her son. Then they landed on Timmy. He sat beside Officer Taylor Green, his face still carrying traces of exhaustion, but his eyes lit up the moment they met hers. "Timmy!" Laura cried, rushing forward. Timmy's head jerked up at the sound of her voice. "Mommy!" he shouted, leaping from his chair and running straight into her arms. Laura dropped to her knees, wrapping him tightly in her embrace, tears streaming freely down her face. "Oh, my baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there," she sobbed, pressing kisses into his messy hair, holding him closer, as if afraid to lose him again. Ethan entered moments later, his legs shaky but his face lighting up at the sight before him. He knelt down, pulling both of them into his arms. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he smoothed Timmy's hair. "You're safe." Timmy leaned into his parents' embrace, the fear he had carried melting away in the warmth and security he had longed for. It was a moment of reunion, a moment of hope, love, and profound relief that bound their family together once more. Timmy clung tightly to Laura, his small frame trembling as he buried his face into his mother's shoulder. "I'm so scared," he mumbled, his voice quivering. "I know, sweetheart," Laura said, gently stroking his messy hair. "It's okay now. You're safe." They sat like that for a few minutes, the family trying to regain their composure after an incredibly tumultuous morning. Officer Taylor Green stepped forward, maintaining a respectful distance to allow the family some space to settle. "I'm so glad you're all reunited," she said with a faint smile. "Timmy's been through a tough morning, but he's been very brave." Matthew stood up, quickly wiping his face to hide the lingering emotions. He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "Thank you. Thank you so much for calling us." Taylor Green shook her head. "It's my job, Mr. Parker, but honestly, the credit goes to the person who brought Timmy here." Matthew's brow furrowed. "Hold on. What do you mean? Did something happen?" Laura held her breath, pressing for answers. "Is she hurt? What happened?" Taylor Green reassured them with a calm shake of her head. "No, she's fine, but she saw two men trying to take Timmy and stepped in. She scared them off and brought Timmy here safely." Matthew turned to Timmy, kneeling in front of him. "Timmy, is that true? A woman saved you?" Timmy nodded, his small hand still clutching Laura's tightly. "Yes, She had a stick, he said softly. She scared the bad men away. Laura let out a shaky sigh, her hand moving to her chest as though to steady herself. Oh my God. Matthew turned back to Taylor Green, his voice urgent. Do you know who this woman is? Taylor Green nodded, pulling a piece of paper from her pocket and handing it to Matthew. Her name is James. She works at a warehouse downtown, Harbor Logistics. She left her contact information in case we needed to follow up. Matthew's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with resolve. I need to meet her. I need to thank her for what she's done. Laura, tears still streaking her face, looked at her husband and nodded. Yes, we need to do that. Without her. She trailed off, shaking her head, unable to finish the sentence. Taylor Green smiled sympathetically. She didn't ask for anything. She just brought Timmy here and left, but I'm sure she'd appreciate hearing your thanks. Matthew gripped the paper tightly in his hand, his expression resolute. We'll find her. We have to. Matthew carefully folded the newspaper, his gaze contemplative as he slipped it into his jacket pocket. On the drive home, Timmy curled up in the back seat. After a chaotic morning, the boy finally drifted off to sleep. Even so, his tiny fingers still clung tightly to Laura's hand, as if holding on to the safety he had just found. Matthew, Laura said softly, her voice low and filled with regret. How could I let this happen? Just 1 second. I turned my back, and he was gone. Matthew reached over, placing his hand over hers, his gaze steady. This wasn't your fault, Laura. Laura's eyes welled up with tears, her lips trembling. Matthew gently squeezed her hand, his voice warm and firm. What matters is that Timmy is safe. Stop blaming yourself. He glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Timmy sleep peacefully for the first time all day. The tear streaks on the boy's cheeks were still visible, but his expression had softened. The image of a trembling, terrified Timmy lingered in Matthew's mind, yet the worry now blended with something deeper, gratitude for the stranger who had shown up at just the right moment. After her shift, James went straight to the medical center where her daughter was being treated. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of machines and the occasional beep of a monitor. James entered, gently closing the door behind her. Her shoes made faint, clicking sounds on the linoleum floor. Sarah, James's daughter, lay on the bed propped up by a stack of pillows. Her skin was pale, but her large brown eyes lit up when she saw her mother. "Mom," Sarah called, her voice weak but brimming with joy. Her daughter's smile made James feel the exhaustion of the day melt away. "Hey, Peanut," she said, walking over and leaning down to kiss Sarah's forehead. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm okay," Sarah replied, shrugging lightly. "The nurse said I'll get to try a new medicine. It's supposed to make me feel better, but I already feel fine." James chuckled softly, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "You always know how to put everyone at ease." Sarah grinned, her eyes sparkling mischievously. "I don't want them to worry." James leaned back in her chair, studying her daughter closely. Sarah had always been stronger than anyone her age. Even as her body grew weaker, her spirit remained bright and undiminished. "You're truly one tough cookie," James said warmly. "Of course. I take after you," Sarah quipped, her playful smile mirroring that of her late mother. James's heart clenched, but she kept her expression calm. "Absolutely," James murmured, brushing a strand of soft, curly hair from Sarah's face. "So what about you? How was your day?" Sarah tilted her head, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What about you? Did you move more boxes today?" James hesitated as the morning's events rushed back. She recalled Timmy's tear-streaked face, his desperate cries for help, and the small hands that had clung tightly to her. She wondered if Sarah was too young to hear this story, but Sarah always had a way of making everything seem lighter. James leaned in, a mysterious smile forming on her lips. "Today was different. I didn't just move boxes." Sarah's eyes widened, filled with excitement. "Really? Then what did you do?" "I saved a little boy." Sarah's jaw dropped, her expression a mixture of amazement and delight. "You saved someone?" James nodded, her gaze softening. "Yes, he was in trouble. 2 bad men were trying to take him, but I scared them off." Sarah clapped her hands, her eyes shining brightly. "You're a hero, Mom." James laughed, her shoulders relaxing. "Not a hero, Peanut. I just did what needed to be done." Sarah grinned from ear to ear, pride radiating from her. "But to me, you'll always be a hero." James chuckled softly, shaking her head with a tender expression. I don't know about that, Peanut. I just did what anyone else would have done. No way, Sarah insisted, her voice rising, eyes sparkling with conviction. Not everyone would do that. Some people would be too scared. But not you. You're a real hero. James couldn't help but smile at her daughter's determination. Well, if my little Peanut says I'm a hero, I suppose I have to believe you. Sarah nodded firmly, her bright smile returning. Did the boy say thank you? What did he say? James nodded, recalling Timmy's frightened face. He was very scared, but I got him to the police, and they called his parents. I think they were truly overjoyed to see him safe. Sarah smiled, but her voice softened, becoming gentler. I'm sure they were really happy. She fidgeted with the edge of her blanket, her gaze turning thoughtful. If something bad ever happened to me, you'd save me too, wouldn't you? James felt her chest tighten. She reached out, taking Sarah's small hand and holding it firmly between her own. Sarah, nothing bad is going to happen to you while I'm here. I'll always protect you, always be there for you. Sarah looked straight into James's eyes, her belief unwavering. I know, Mom. That's why you're my hero. Those words struck James more deeply than anything else. She smiled softly, her thumb brushing over the back of Sarah's hand. No, Peanut, you're the real hero. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Sarah smiled, but James noticed a flicker of exhaustion in her daughter's eyes. Her eyelids drooped slightly, and she shifted positions every few minutes, trying to find comfort. Despite her strength, James knew better. Sarah was worn out, and it crushed James's heart to see it. James let out a quiet sigh as she glanced around the room. The endlessly beeping machines, the expensive medications, and most of all, the bills. Bills that seemed to pile up higher and higher, never stopping. Her warehouse salary barely covered rent and food, let alone Sarah's medical expenses. No matter how many extra hours she worked, it never felt like enough. But James couldn't let Sarah see that burden. What her daughter needed was certainty, strength, and hope from her mother. You know, James said after a moment, her voice softening, when you get out of here, we're heading straight to the park. Slides, swings, and ice cream. Whatever you want. Sarah's eyes lit up at the promise. James leaned down, holding out her pinky. Pinky swear. In their familiar ritual, their fingers locked together tightly. Every day if you want, Sarah replied, a tender smile spreading across her small face. I can't wait. James smiled, but as she sat back and watched Sarah settle down, her mind raced. Sarah didn't know that she wasn't actually getting better. She didn't know that her treatment options were nearly exhausted. James swallowed hard, forcing herself to smile at Sarah again, because that's what her daughter needed from her. Not fear, but hope. Even when James herself didn't have much left to hold on to. I love you, Peanut, she said, her voice as soft as a lullaby. I love you too, Mom, Sarah replied, closing her eyes with a small smile still on her lips. Love you so much, Sarah whispered, her voice growing weaker as her eyes began to close. James stayed by her bedside, holding her tiny hand long after she drifted off to sleep. The peace on Sarah's face was a rare balm for the relentless worry that weighed on James's heart. The pale morning sunlight filtered through the faded curtains in James's small room. She sat at the rickety kitchen table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. In front of her lay a battered notebook where she reviewed her schedule for the week. Next to it sat a neatly stacked pile of bills, but every glance at them felt like facing an insurmountable mountain. Sarah's treatment was her top priority, but every time James crunched the numbers, they refused to align in her favor. A soft knock at the door broke her train of thought. James frowned, glancing at the clock on the wall. 10:22 a.m. It was too early for visitors, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Peeking through the thin curtain, she saw a sleek black SUV idling outside, its engine still running. Her body stiffened, and her grip on the mug tightened. Could it be the kidnappers? The men who had tried to take Timmy? Her heart pounded fiercely in her chest. If they had come to retaliate. Taking a deep breath, James stood, her eyes scanning the room for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze landed on a wooden baseball bat leaning against the wall near the door. Grabbing it, she felt a small sense of reassurance as her hands gripped the bat firmly. Another knock sounded, louder and more deliberate this time. Hello, I'm Ethan Johnson, a man's voice called out, calm but firm. My wife and I would like to speak with you. Are you home? James froze, her grip loosening on the bat. Ethan Johnson. The name sounded familiar. Parker, that was Timmy's last name. Slowly, she approached the door, her steps cautious and deliberate. Peering through the peephole, she saw a man in his early 40s wearing a polo shirt and jeans, standing beside a kind-looking woman in a soft cardigan. Their faces held no malice, only worry and anticipation. James exhaled in relief, setting the bat aside. Still, she remained cautious as she unlocked the door and opened it slightly. Her eyes quickly scanned the couple. "Can I help you?" The man stepped forward, extending his hand. "Hello, I'm Ethan Johnson, and this is my wife, Laura. We're Timmy's parents." James paused briefly, but shook his hand without hesitation. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I'm James." Laura stepped closer, her eyes glistening with tears. "We came to thank you," she said, her voice trembling but heartfelt. "You saved our son. If it weren't for you, we don't know what would have happened." Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. "We can't begin to express how grateful we are. You did something not everyone would dare to do." James shrugged, trying to maintain her humility. "I just did what I felt I had to do. I saw Timmy was in danger and I couldn't walk away." "No," Laura said firmly, her voice steady. "You did more than that. You protected our son. You brought him home safely." James looked at them, her heart swelling with emotion, though she kept a modest smile. "I'm just glad Timmy's okay. That's what matters most." Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on James's shoulder, his gaze sincere. "If there's anything we can do to help you, please don't hesitate to let us know. You didn't just save Timmy, you saved our entire family." James felt the warmth in his words, but she shook her head lightly. "Honestly, just knowing he's safe is enough for me." Laura brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "You're an extraordinary person, James, truly extraordinary." James smiled faintly, but those words felt like a gentle breeze clearing the weight and exhaustion of the day. "I just did what anyone should do," she said, her voice soft yet sincere. Ethan and Laura gave her a grateful nod, as if no further words were needed to convey the depth of their appreciation. When James heard Timmy's name, she relaxed and opened the door wider. "Oh, all right. Sorry, I thought." James hesitated, then quickly continued. "It doesn't matter. Please, come in." The couple stepped in with slight hesitation, their eyes scanning the small room. Despite the dim lighting, the worn, sunken sofa, and peeling wallpaper in places, everything was kept clean and tidy. James scratched her head awkwardly. Sorry about the place. It's not much." "It's fine." Laura quickly replied, her voice sincere. "We're not here to judge. We just wanted to thank you in person." Matthew nodded, his gaze filled with emotion. "Honestly, what you did for Timmy, we can't put into words how grateful we are." James shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. She gestured toward the sofa. "Please, have a seat." The couple sat down, but Laura seemed unable to stay still. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Timmy told us everything," Laura began, her voice trembling. "He told us about the men, how scared he was, and how you saved him." Laura took a deep breath, her voice breaking. "I can't even imagine what could have happened if you hadn't been there, but now he's safe. That's what matters most." James gently sat down on the chair opposite, her hands clasped in her lap. "Yes, what matters is that he's safe now." Laura exhaled shakily, wiping her tears. "Timmy is our only child," she said, her voice breaking. "He means the world to us. We can never repay you for what you've done." Matthew placed a steady hand on Laura's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze before turning back to James. James nodded slowly, feeling the weight of their gratitude. "I understand," she replied softly. "I have a daughter. I'd do anything for her too." Matthew tilted his head, curiosity evident on his face. "Your daughter? Is she here?" James hesitated, her eyes flickering toward a photo on the wall. In the picture, Sarah was smiling brightly, wearing a vibrant yellow dress. "No," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "She's at the medical center. She's been there for a while now. Chronic pneumonia." Laura raised a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she whispered. James shook her head, her voice steady but heavy. "It's just the way it is. She's strong, stronger than me, most days, but it's hard. The bills, the treatments, they just keep coming." Matthew leaned forward, his brow furrowing with concern. And you're handling all of this on your own? James gave a light shrug, trying to appear nonchalant. Her dad left when things got tough. It's just me and Sarah now. The room fell into a brief silence, the faint hum of the fridge the only sound. Laura wiped her eyes, her voice gentle. You're an amazing parent. Sarah's lucky to have you. James lowered her head, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. She's my whole world. Matthew straightened up, his gaze resolute. James, please let us help you. Whatever you need for your daughter's treatment, let us take care of it. Consider it done. James looked up, her eyes blinking quickly in surprise. I really appreciate it, truly, but I can't accept. You don't have to do anything, Matthew interrupted firmly. It's the least we can do. You saved our son, James. Now, let us help your daughter. Laura nodded, her eyes full of emotion. You saved our family, James. Now it's time for us to give back. James felt a lightness in her heart, as if part of the burden had been lifted. She looked at them, her eyes softening, but her voice remained earnest. Thank you. I truly appreciate it. The Parker family smiled, relief evident on their faces. In that very moment, an unspoken bond formed between them, not just of gratitude, but of profound human empathy. Matthew smiled, though his eyes remained serious. Good. And I have another idea that could help you, not just for Sarah, but for yourself as well. James tilted her head, her gaze a mix of caution and curiosity. What do you mean? Where are you working right now? Matthew asked, his tone calm but calculated. James sighed, giving a light shrug. A warehouse. Enough to cover the basics. Matthew nodded, as if confirming something to himself. I think I can help you with that. I own Parker Global Enterprises, a logistics company, and we have an open position. Better pay, more flexible hours. What do you think? James paused, her eyes widening in surprise. Are you serious? Matthew nodded firmly, leaning forward. His hands rested on his knees, like his gaze steady on James. Completely serious. I have a position in operations, not a glamorous role, but it's an honest job with better pay than what you're making now. Most importantly, the hours are more flexible. You'll have more time to spend with your daughter. James stared at him, disbelief flickering in her eyes. This sounds too good to be true. Matthew chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's not. You're clearly hardworking, and you have a resilience I admire. I need people like you on my team. This is a real job, James, not a favor or charity. Laura chimed in, her voice gentle yet encouraging. Think about what this could mean. A chance to care for Sarah without constantly worrying about finances. James rubbed the back of her neck, her eyes darting between Matthew and Laura as she tried to process what was happening. You really want to help me? No strings attached? Matthew nodded, his voice unwavering. Absolutely. You didn't just save Timmy, you saved our family. This is the least we can do to repay you. James took a deep breath, feeling a part of the weight on her shoulders lift. All right, let's talk more about it. A faint smile appeared on Matthew's lips. Good, I think we'll work well together. Laura looked at James, her eyes glimmering. Sarah has an incredible mother, and you deserve all the good things life has to offer. James sat up straighter, feeling for the first time in a long while that a real glimmer of hope had entered her life. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to rebuild, to give Sarah what she deserved, and to believe that sometimes good things could happen, even in a chaotic world. That afternoon, Matthew and Laura accompanied James to the medical center to visit Sarah. As they entered the room, Sarah, resting her head on a pillow, opened her wide brown eyes in surprise at the sight of two strangers standing beside her father. Mom, who are they? The little girl asked, her voice curious but slightly shy. James smiled, setting down the bag of snacks she had brought for her. These are Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Remember the boy I told you about? Timmy, the one I helped. These are his parents. Sarah's eyes lit up in recognition, and she waved politely. Hello. Laura stepped forward, holding a few carefully chosen gifts. A stuffed bear with a bright red bow, a puzzle set, and a couple of superhero-themed children's books. Hi, Sarah, Laura said warmly, kneeling beside the bed. Your mom told us so many wonderful things about you. We thought you might like these. Sarah's face lit up as she reached for the stuffed bear, hugging it tightly to her chest. Thank you, she said, her voice joyful, her radiant smile unmistakable. You're welcome, Laura replied with a smile, though her eyes glimmered with emotion. Matthew moved closer, bending slightly to meet Sarah's gaze. His voice was gentle yet full of feeling. Did you know your mom is a hero? The most amazing woman? She saved our son, and we're so grateful. We wanted to meet the girl who makes her mom so strong. Sarah looked up at James with wide, loving eyes full of admiration. James sat down beside her daughter, gently brushing her soft curls. You're the one who makes me strong, Peanut, James said softly. Everything I do every day is for you. Sarah smiled, resting her head on James's shoulder, her heart filled with pride and happiness. It was a day where hope and love, though simple, were enough to make all burdens feel a little lighter. Sarah's small fingers clung tightly to the stuffed bear, her eyes shining brightly. Mom already told me you're a hero, she said, her voice clear and filled with pride. James chuckled, rubbing the back of her neck. I guess I can't argue with two smart people saying the same thing now, can I? They all laughed, the sound erasing any remaining tension in the room, transforming it into a warm and comforting space. Over the next hour, Matthew and Laura stayed to chat with Sarah. She talked about her love for books, her dreams of visiting the park again, and the little stories she often made up in her head. Laura listened intently, her eyes welling up with tears more than once as she witnessed Sarah's bright and optimistic spirit. Matthew nodded repeatedly, clearly impressed by the girl's resilience and vivid imagination. Before leaving, Matthew knelt beside Sarah's bed, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of seriousness and gentleness. Sarah, he said, his voice warm and steady, I want you to promise me something. Sarah tilted her head, curious. What is it? Promise me you'll keep being brave, just like you are now, Matthew said, his tone calm but resolute. Your mom and I will make sure you get through everything. You have so many people rooting for you. Sarah's smile softened, her eyes reflecting trust. She extended her small hand to shake his, her tiny fingers gripping his firmly. I promise, she replied confidently. Matthew stood up, his expression filled with determination. Good. As the Parker family departed, James walked them to the hallway. Thank you, she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Not just for the job, but for everything. It means so much. Matthew placed a steady hand on James's shoulder. This is just the beginning. You saved my family, James. Now let us help yours. James nodded, feeling her heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, she could see a path ahead, a path with hope at its end. On her first day at Parker Global Enterprises, James stood in the break room, adjusting her crisp, new blue shirt embroidered with the company logo. The morning started with a quick training session on safety guidelines and workflows, followed by her introduction to her new supervisor, Cynthia Morales. James couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this place and her old warehouse job, a symbol of exhaustion and pressure. Here, the atmosphere was filled with purpose. She held the training manual, reviewing the notes she had carefully written. Though she initially felt unqualified, James reminded herself why she was here. Sarah, the opportunity to give her daughter the life she deserved. By the end of her first day, James was following Cynthia through the bustling operations floor, where goods were handled with incredible precision and efficiency. James observed shipments being tracked, delivery routes optimized, and teams working together seamlessly like a well-oiled machine. Though the new terminology and advanced technology occasionally confused her, James absorbed every detail. By the end of the week, Cynthia took notice. You've got a sharp eye, Cynthia remarked as they walked through the inventory area. Not many people pick things up as quickly as you. Have you worked in logistics before? James chuckled lightly. Not unless you count juggling rent and hospital bills, she joked, though the truth behind her words brought a brief silence between them. Cynthia paused, her eyes reflecting an evaluative look. Whatever you've done before, keep doing it. We need problem solvers here, and you have the focus this team really needs. Those words sparked a pride in James that she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, she felt like more than just a cog in a machine. She was an integral part of it. The new work hours were truly a gift. No longer did James endure late-night shifts that left her dragging herself to the hospital in a half-dazed state. Instead, she left the office at 5 p.m., with enough time to buy fresh flowers or Sarah's favorite snacks before visiting her daughter. Thanks to the connections Matthew provided, Sarah was receiving treatment from top specialists. Each week, she made small strides. Color returned to her cheeks, her energy gradually came back, and the sparkle in her eyes, which James cherished most of all, began to shine brighter. One evening, as James entered the hospital room with a smoothie in hand, Sarah sat up straight, her face lit up with a bright smile. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice brimming with joy. James set the smoothie on the bedside table, pretending to be stern. "Someone's in a great mood today. What's got you so excited?" Sarah pointed to a small chart on the wall where the nurse had circled today's date in bold green with the words "discharge soon." "They think I can go home soon," Sarah said, her voice sparkling with excitement. James bent down, her heart swelling with emotion. "That's the best news I've heard all week," she said softly. Sarah tilted her head curiously. "But, Mom, where will we go?" James grinned, her eyes lighting up. "Funny you should ask that, Peanut. I have a surprise for you." Sarah's eyes widened with excitement. "What surprise?" "You'll see," James said mysteriously, gently tapping her daughter's nose. 2 weeks later, Sarah finally left the medical center, clutching her discharge papers in hand. James drove her through town to the surprise she had planned since her first paycheck at Parker Global. When they stopped in front of a modest yet well-maintained apartment building, Sarah gasped in astonishment. "Is this where we're going?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. James stepped out of the car, smiling as she opened the door for her daughter. "This is our home." Sarah bolted ahead, her still recovering legs doing little to slow her enthusiasm. James followed, soaking in the joy radiating from her daughter. Inside, the apartment wasn't luxurious but was spacious and cozy, a complete contrast to the cramped, run-down room they had once called home. The living room had a sofa that didn't need duct tape to stay together. The kitchen was roomy enough for them to cook together like they used to. And, most importantly, Sarah had her own bedroom, a bright and cheerful space decorated with posters of her favorite cartoon characters. Sarah ran her hand along the edge of her new bed, whispering, "All mine. All yours," James confirmed, leaning against the doorframe. Sarah turned around and wrapped her arms tightly around James. "I love it, Mom. Thank you." James hugged her close, her eyes stinging with tears. "You should thank yourself, Peanut. You're the reason for all of this." James and Sarah's new life began to take shape. Sarah's recovery continued steadily, and James found herself not just adapting, but thriving in her role at Parker Global Enterprises. One afternoon, Cynthia pulled her aside, a bright smile on her face. "James, your suggestions for optimizing the delivery schedules have saved the company a significant amount of money. Matthew Parker himself called to commend your work." That evening, Matthew personally called James. "James, I'm truly glad I trusted my instincts about you," he said over the phone. "You have a real talent for this." James smiled, her voice filled with pride. "Thank you, sir." At home, Sarah grew more vibrant with each passing day. She started making a list of things she wanted to do once fully recovered, from trips to the park and movie nights to returning to school. For James, every day now felt like a new beginning. The burdens she had carried for so long were finally lifting. The early morning call broke the quiet in James's kitchen. She had just poured coffee into her favorite mug when the phone buzzed on the counter. The screen displayed a number from the local police station. James froze, the mug hovering in her hand. She set it down and took a deep breath before answering. "Hello," James said, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Sarah, who was still asleep in her room. "Mrs. Carter, this is Officer Taylor Green," a familiar voice said. James felt her chest tighten. "Hello, what's going on?" "I wanted to update you on the case involving Timmy Parker's attempted abduction," Taylor Green said firmly. "We've arrested the two men you described." James exhaled deeply, a wave of relief washing over her. "Not only that," Taylor continued, "we've connected them to a larger human trafficking ring we've been investigating for months. Your actions that day helped prevent additional victims and provided us with crucial leads to dismantle the network." James was silent for a moment, emotions swirling within her. "They won't hurt anyone else," Taylor added. "We have enough evidence to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. You did something incredible, Mrs. Carter, something very brave." James nodded, though Taylor couldn't see her through the phone. It took her a moment to respond. "Thank you for letting me know." "Anytime," Taylor replied. "If you'd like to visit the station to learn more or discuss the case, don't hesitate to reach out to me." James sat back down at the kitchen table, her hands gripping the now cold coffee mug. In her mind, she replayed everything, from the moment she stepped in to save Timmy to starting a new life for Sarah. It wasn't just a brave act, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope. Sarah was still peacefully asleep in her room, and James knew that, while the road ahead might still be long, she and Sarah were no longer walking it alone. Life now was full of light, no longer shadowed by darkness. "Your file is welcome," the officer said, handing James a folder. James sat in silence for a moment before replying, "I'll think about it." But deep down, she knew she was ready to close this chapter of her life. That weekend, James found herself sitting across from Ethan Johnson at the police station. Since the incident, they hadn't spoken much about the kidnappers, but today the topic was unavoidable. Matthew flipped through the pages of the green file he had brought. His jaw clenched as he read through the charges against the two men. "This is worse than I thought," Matthew murmured, closing the file and looking up at James. "It wasn't just Timmy. They've done this before, likely more times than we'll ever know." James nodded, her expression somber. "But at least they're off the streets now." Matthew looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. "If it weren't for you that day, I can't even imagine what could have happened." He exhaled deeply. James shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the praise. "You've done more than enough, Matthew. You've given me the chance to change my life, to change Sarah's life." Matthew smiled faintly. "Then let's call it a mutual agreement." They stood and shook hands, a shared sense of resolve as they left the police station together. Sarah's full recovery soon followed, marking a milestone James had long dreamed of. The doctor finally gave the green light, and James decided to throw a small party to celebrate. Their new apartment's living room was decorated with vibrant streamers and colorful balloons. The kitchen counter was covered with cupcakes that James had painstakingly frosted. Sarah, radiant in a bright yellow dress, stood at the center of it all, a beacon of joy. "Mom, this is the best party ever," she exclaimed, spinning in delight, her hair flowing with her movements. James laughed, her eyes filled with pride and gratitude. "You deserve it, sweetheart. You've been through so much. It's time to celebrate your strength." Sarah paused and ran to hug James tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you. You did most of the work." James held her close, her voice thick with emotion, as she kissed her daughter's soft hair. "No, Peanut, you're the one who did it all." Just as they finished their cupcakes, James received a call from Matthew. "James, we're hosting Timmy's birthday party this weekend," Matthew said. "It would be wonderful if you and Sarah could come. It's a chance to celebrate Sarah's recovery and spend time together as a family." James hesitated briefly, but Sarah's excited expression upon hearing the invitation helped her make up her mind. "We'll be there," James said, smiling and nodding to her daughter. The Parker family's backyard looked like it came straight out of a magazine. Lush green grass, a sparkling blue pool, and tables laden with food greeted James and Sarah as they arrived. Sarah's eyes widened in amazement. "Mom, this is amazing," she whispered, clutching James's hand. "It sure is, sweetheart," James replied, feeling slightly out of place but happy to see Sarah's excitement. Matthew and Laura welcomed them warmly, guiding them toward the other guests. As soon as Timmy spotted Sarah, he ran over, holding a balloon. "Hi, want to play?" he asked. Sarah nodded eagerly, and within moments, the two children were running around the yard, laughing like old friends. "That's kids for you," Laura said with a smile, watching them. "It sure is," James replied, her gaze soft as she watched her daughter. As the evening progressed, James found herself more at ease than she'd been in a long time. Under the warm glow of lights, the adults gathered around the patio table, chatting and laughing. At one point, Matthew raised his glass, his voice carrying across the group. "I'd like to make a toast to James, who not only saved my son, but reminded us all that a single brave act can change lives forever. My family will always be grateful." Glasses clinked, and James, though taken aback, could only nod. Her throat tightened with emotion. As the stars began to fill the night sky, James sat on the edge of the patio, watching Sarah and Timmy play by the pool. For the first time in a long while, James felt a profound sense of peace. Life was still imperfect and challenges lay ahead, but tonight was proof of how far they had come. And for James, that was enough. Thank you for following the story of James Carter, an inspiring journey of courage, love, and hope. If this story has touched your heart, please click like, share it to spread this meaningful message, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another amazing story. Remember, sometimes just one small action, one brave decision can change an entire life or even an entire family. See you in the next video. Stay brave and loving.